Shall we just visualize a huge snow cone right outside that door? It's wafting that cool air right across us, allowing us to just relax for the next few minutes. Blessings to you all, by the way. I think a lot about God, or if you prefer, one's higher power, the divine power, the great mystery, transcending spirit, ground of our being, intelligent energy, etc. By whatever name people have come up with to try and describe God, I often find myself preoccupied with trying to understand how best to relate to this being. It is not too much to say that finding a definitive answer to exactly who or what God is, whether there even is one, and how to relate to this entity, if there is, has been the most enduring quest of my life. Okay, let me pause at the outset and acknowledge that perhaps most, if not all of you listening to these remarks, have settled this matter about who or what God is for you long ago. One person with whom I'm very well acquainted says that humans have created God, not the other way around. Like her, perhaps you rarely, if ever, give one iota of thought to this subject any longer. I can imagine that many of you don't even use the word God to describe whatever it is that that word stands for in your thinking. I may well be alone in my quandaries. Yet, I would like to think that a UU fellowship is a safe place for me to venture ahead. I certainly hope so. But I am clear that this need not be an issue of concern for you, and in saying so, I must beg your indulgence for just a while as I kick around some ideas with you. I'll do my best not to bore you, and by the end of my remarks, help you realize why I have chosen to speak on this topic. Now back to my quandary. I will often ask people, even those I hardly know, whether they believe in God, and if so, what and who is the God he or she believes in? And if they have a belief in God, by whatever name they use to describe God, how does this belief inform their behavior in life? What difference does it make to them? For the record, I have listened to and read very persuasive atheists on the question of whether there is a God. People such as neuroscientist Sam Harris, biologist Richard Dawkins, theoretical physicist Lawrence Krauss, the late brilliant journalist Christopher Hitchens, comedian Ricky Gervais, and even remember watching a documentary years ago about the controversial Madeleine Marie O'Hare. Remember her? Perhaps the first really famous atheist, famous enough that my boyhood pastors warned us about her. Now, what I have concluded myself from these arguments against the existence of God by the likes of those whom I just mentioned is that the God they are referring to most often, I don't believe in either. That God, in my imagination, was simply understood as some kind of superhuman being who supposedly knew my thoughts, along with the thoughts of several billion other people on this planet. Now, what really shattered my belief in that kind of God, that I think most atheists rail against, is my readings and learnings about the nature of the universe. The more I read about the sheer size of the cosmos and the billion-year span from the origin of time to the present day in this universe, forget about the possibility of other universes, I could no longer fathom a creator being making all this happen or existing within or beyond this universe. What form could such a being have? Is this being hiding in some black hole somewhere where light doesn't even exist? Now let me confess, there was a time, as you could probably imagine, when the God that I no longer believe in was very personal to me, and I was certain of his existence. My Father in heaven, as the prayer goes, was how I referred to him. One of the deep impressions from my childhood after my dad was killed in an auto accident at the age of 13 was formed from what my mother often quoted from a verse in the Psalms to bring comfort to us, her kids, and to herself. That verse said, God is a father to the fatherless and a husband to the widow. Now, no one would fault a 13-year-old for wanting to cling to an understanding of a benevolent personal God in the wake of such a loss. As I continued into my later teen years and early adulthood, I saw no reason to question that God was indeed my Father in heaven, to whom I prayed and complained and sought to please, and who I believed was disappointed with my moral and ethical lapses as I viewed them at the time. And yet I believed that this God loved me and watched over me continually, just as the Holy Bible said. It was only later in seminary, when my early unexamined views of the Bible and the God that the Bible revealed came under scrutiny. And before long, my unschooled views didn't hold up under the weight of the ideas I began to understand from my seminary courses in biblical criticism. I began to see that the authors of the biblical texts were not necessarily interested in reporting facts, not unlike certain news outlets today. Rather, the biblical writers were more interested in telling stories, each with his own perspective. So the all-seeing, all-knowing, all-everything personal God I had related to for much of my life began to fade away. Now you might imagine, and you would be right, that this questioning came as somewhat of a crisis of faith for me, and I carried that crisis right into my first calling as a minister. The questions that surfaced in seminary for me about the veracity of the Bible and the nature of God only deepened as time went on. However, I didn't have the courage or the skill to bring that congregation along with me on my theological quest. They didn't call me for that purpose, I reasoned, so while my views were shifting about the so-called divinity of Jesus, the nature of God, the Trinity, and so forth, I pretty much towed the line in my weekly sermons, though it was a tremendous, tremendous internal struggle for me. 17 years later, I left that church and entered a period of secular employment in the nonprofit sector. And the relief I experienced in not having to stifle my quest for truth any longer, no matter where it led, was liberating, and it opened to me to a world that included forays into Buddhist ideas, hanging out occasionally at our local Hindu ashram, pursuing the non-dual teachings of Ramana Maharshi, the teachers, the students of those, and attending their retreats, all while reading scores of spiritual books from non-Christian perspectives. I even joined the local Rotary Club. Well, here I am, many years later, yet still a man of the cloth, soon to take on a short-term assignment at a congregational church near Lake Tahoe in Northern California, serving as their supply pastor during the month of June. My first service is 1 week from today. But I'm no more certain of the God I will be speaking about than what I have already suggested to you. As Dee Dee mentioned earlier, I titled this sermon, Settling the God Question, Maybe. In my remaining time, let's talk about the maybe part. The quest goes on, of course. The quest maybe not for you, but for me to become settled in this matter. I mean, you all look pretty settled to me, but perhaps you're open to some further thoughts on the issue at hand. Can I pause and just get a drink of water? My throat's a little bit dry. Remember that ice cone out the door there? Thank you. Thank you, Kate. So, to move to an understanding that might resonate with you, here are some ideas about God set forth by some individuals that I'm sure you're all familiar with. The first person is Eckhart Tolle. In his widely read book, The Power of Now, Tolle used the word being to express his understanding of God. As such, he wrote, "Being is the eternal, ever-present one life beyond the myriad forms of life that are subject to birth and death." He went on, "Being is not only beyond, but also deep within every form at its innermost, invisible, and indestructible essence." When Tolle explained why he used the word being instead of God, he said, "The word being explains nothing, but nor does God. Being, however, has the advantage that it is an open concept. It does not reduce the infinite invisible to a finite entity." So I guess you could say that for Tolle, the infinite invisible was what he would best say describes God. The infinite invisible, something invisible and indestructible, deep within each living entity, including us. Is it this aspect of us that causes us to seek, to hope, to love, to wonder? Now, the second quote comes from none other than Albert Einstein. In Walter Isaacson's highly acclaimed biography, Einstein, His Life and Universe, there is a chapter titled Einstein's God. Isaacson writes that during a dinner party where Einstein was a guest, one of the other guests ridiculed religion, at which the genius remarked, and I quote, "Try and penetrate with our limited means the secrets of nature, and you will find that behind all the discernible laws and connections, there remains something subtle, intangible, and inexplicable. In other words, a mystery." On another occasion, when asked explicitly whether he believed in God, Einstein said, "I am not an atheist." I should add, however, that Einstein did not believe in a personal God. Rather, he leaned toward the Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza's understanding that all of God and nature is a single substance. How many people have you heard say, perhaps even yourself, "My God is nature," or something to that effect? Now, finally, from another science heavyweight are these comments from Stephen Hawking in his book, Brief Answers to Big Question. Hawking writes, "If you accept, as I do, that the laws of nature are fixed, then it doesn't take long to ask, what role is there for God? One could define God as the embodiment of the laws of nature, similar to Einstein's view. This is not what most people think of as God. They mean a human-like being with whom one can have a personal relationship. When you look at the vast size of the universe, Hawking said, and how insignificant and accidental human life is in it, that seems most implausible. Now, these last two sentences from what Hawking said, I think best sum up my evolved or devolved understanding of God. As I mentioned earlier, it was my reckoning with the cosmos and our relative insignificance in the face of it that began to shift my view of what God must be. However, what that exactly was, I have not been able to fix in my mind. Maybe that's the point. Any plausible being that we might affix the word God to must almost by definition be ungraspable by our limited minds. Now, I realize that by saying this, I leave the issue of who God is, well, unsettled. I did say maybe, after all. But here's something else I want to put forward. My thinking has changed on so many things over these 71 years. Why should it be any different with a being that I first heard about as a young boy from people who were not schooled in the vastness of the universe, people who took the Bible literally, people who frankly were not really open to other points of view? Now that I have immersed myself in many points of view and finally winding up here among you free-thinking folks, bless you all, how can it be any different? So the best I can say now at this moment is, I believe there's something beyond and within me, something that compels me to keep seeking, to remain open, to stay engaged, to wonder about, to be grateful for, to feel humble in the presence of, and to feel a sense of gratitude that all of this is so, at least for me. The other thing that follows, hand in glove, is that these attitudes that I show towards this mysterious, unseen spirit or being are the attitudes that I want to have towards flesh and blood people that I can see, who are not hidden from view, attitudes towards you in this fellowship, towards my family and friends, towards strangers, even towards those I find objectionable, which is a major challenge. Each one of us is a mysterious being, one of a kind, unrepeatable, and I believe bearing transcendent energy or spirit worthy of curiosity, engagement, gratitude, and attentiveness. The God, by whatever name that I choose to call this ineffable energy or spirit, must mirror in some way those who I can actually see in the mirror of my perception, including myself. So I rest my case, and I hope that maybe you have found something of value for yourselves in this message. So may it be.